I'm Tienzo, and now to share our awareness, let me first discuss what is biogeochemical cycle. It is the ways in which an element or compound such as water moves between its various living and non-living things. And locations in the biosphere is called a biogeochemical cycle. So biogeochemical cycles are essential to living organisms, including water, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Now to focus on one, which is the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle is nature's way of reusing carbon atoms, which travel from the atmosphere over and over again. Most carbon is stored in rocks and sediments, while the rest is stored in the ocean, the atmosphere, and some living organisms. Now, animals eat plants or other animals later. They poop and die, and carbon cycles back into the soil. The movement of carbon between the atmosphere, soil, and biosphere is the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle is vital to life on Earth. Nature tends to keep carbon levels balanced, meaning that the amount of carbon naturally released from reservoirs is equal to the amount that is naturally absorbed by reservoirs. Now, maintaining this carbon balance allows the planet to remain hospitable for life. Too little carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases and the Earth will be frozen. Too much will turn the atmosphere into a furnace. That's why understanding the carbon cycle and our role in that cycle is critical to the Earth's future.
What is the steady state of biochemical cycle? In a steady state, the inputs and outputs of a particular element in an ecosystem are in balance, leading to relatively constant concentrations of the element within that system over time. This balance does not imply that there is no more movements or transformations of the element, but rather than the overall amount of the element within the ecosystem remains relatively stable. However, it is essential to note that the biochemical cycles are often influenced by natural and human-induced factors that can dispute their balance, leading to changes in the concentrations of elements in the ecosystem. For example, deforestation and burning of fossil fuels can release more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, altering the carbon cycle and contributing to global climate change. If the term steady-state biochemical cycle has emerged or evolved beyond my last update, recommend consulting more recent scientific literature or resources for the latest information.
Anthropogenic effect, also known as anthropogenic stress or human-induced stress, refer to the impacts and pressure that human activities have on the natural environment and various living organisms. These effects are a result of human activities altering ecosystem and disrupting the balance of ecological processes. Anthropogenic stress can have wide-ranging consequences on the environment, wildlife, and human well-being. Some common anthropogenic stressors include: number 1 is habitat destruction. It is a human activities such as deforestation, urbanization, and agricultural expansion that leads to the destruction and fragmentation of natural habitats, impacting various species and their ability to survive and reproduce. The second one is pollution. Pollution from industrial, agricultural, and domestic sources can contaminate air, water, and soil. The third one is climate change. It is also human activities, particularly the burning of fossil fuels, contribute to the emission of greenhouse gases, which leads to global warming and climate change. The fourth one is overexploitation. Overharvesting of natural resources, such as overfishing and deforestation, can deplete populations of of certain species and disrupt the ecological balance.
Invasive species. The introduction of non-native species into a new environment could outcompete native species, causing disruption in local ecosystems and biodiversity.
An invasive species is an organism that causes ecological or economic harm in a new environment where it is not native. Invasive species reduces the diversity of a plant and animal species in an environment and can put native species at risk. They do this by crowding out or competing for resources like water, light, and nutrients, preying on the native species or acting as carriers for diseases or parasites that could spread to native species. The most economical and safest way to manage invasive species is by prevention. Early detection and rapid response, are also known as EDRR, of invasive species is much more effective than trying to control a widespread infestation. If eradication is not possible, the invasive species may be subject to control and management efforts. Our goal to this campaign about invasive species is to engage in dialogue with key audiences about invasive species and their impacts and share methods for stopping the spread of invasive species. We can all do our part by sharing a united message on the threat invasive species to pose to every natural heritage.
An invasive species is an organism that is not indigenous or native to a particular area. Invasive species can cause great economic and environmental harm to the new area. To be invasive, a species must adapt to the new area easily. It must reproduce quickly, it must harm property, the economy, or the native plants and animals of the region. The best way to fight invasive species is to prevent them from occurring. The most economical and safest way to manage invasive species is by prevention. The early detection and eradication of invasive species is much more effective than trying to control a widespread infestation. It is important that new species are not introduced into a sensitive area. Most often, equipment and vehicles carry the invasive species into a new area. Livestock and wildlife can also be responsible for the spread of invasive species into other areas. Thus, the way to prevent the spread of invasive species is to ensure all vehicles and equipment are clean and livestock are immunized and kept separate from the new livestock. Only when the new livestock have been checked for diseases and parasites and immunized, they can be allowed to mingle with the other livestock.
How do invasive species spread? Human activities often unintentionally spread invasive species. People and things travel swiftly over the world, and they frequently bring unwelcome species with them. Ship ballast water, firewood, unintentional discharge, and individuals can all introduce invasive species into a region. Insects may be easily carried in wood, shipping pallets and crates shipped around the world. After escaping in the wild, ornaments plants can become invasive. Invasive species are also transmitted through the release of unwanted pets. What are the impacts of invasive species? The intentionally or unintentionally introduction and establishments of invasive species in the United States can pose a substantial threat to native and plant communities. Invasive species can cause the loss of native plants and animals, as well as the destruction of biodiversity and permanent alteration of environments.
Fragmentation and connectivity loss. Human infrastructure such as roads, highways, and dams can fragment natural habitats and hinder the movement of wildlife, affecting their ability to find food, mates, and suitable habitats. Noise pollution. Anthropogenic noise from urban areas, transportation, and industrial activities can disturb wildlife behavior and communication, potentially affecting their survival and reproduction. Chemical contaminants. Chemicals like pesticides, herbicides, and industrial chemicals can have detrimental effect on organisms, including toxicity and disruption to hormonal systems. These anthropogenic stressors have complex and interconnected effects on the environment. They can lead to loss of biodiversity, reduced ecosystem resilience, altered natural processes, and potentially even threaten human health and well-being. Addressing anthropogenic stress requires a combination of policy changes, sustainable practices, conservation efforts, and public awareness to minimize and mitigate human impacts on the environment.
To bring about awareness of invasive species, one must consider what caused a species to become invasive. We need to be aware of species that are out there outcompeting with the natives for their foods and outgrowing the population. Invasive species can come in many forms, from land animals, oceanic organisms, or plant species.
Another awareness is to take upon is the greater the invasive species, the population, the higher the environmental impact it will cause, and the easier it is to be noticed by people. For example, Finlay's squirrels, native to Indochina, sighted in Batangas or Nueva Ecija. They are a common threat to native bird species in the Philippines. Also, an invasive species could also compete with native plants species that covers a wide surface, causing environmental loss of origin such as the low level of oxygen in the water that water lilies cause in the Pasig River or in Laguna de Bay.